Why is housing regulation such a big failure?
It's an incredible amount of artificial scarcity that's like charging for air. We need the air very badly. There's plenty of air for everyone, but the government will not allow you to breathe without a breathing permit.
Are people just bad at evaluating these things?
They are not using that knowledge. Instead, they are guided by simple-minded slogans of, I don't want any more traffic, I don't want any more parking. Political thinking is at a level that makes one almost embarrassed to be part of the human race.
Bryan Caplan, welcome to the show.
Fantastic to be here, David.
We're here to talk about your new book, Build, Baby, Build, which is all about housing regulation. Why is housing regulation such a big failure?
So that's the question of what's causing it rather than how do we know that it's causing harm, or what do you have in mind?
More so like, how do we know it's causing harm? So
Okay.
you break into housing
Right.
regulation.
Okay, so we can start with, we've seen this very large rise in housing prices, especially in desirable areas, much higher than you would expect from inflation. And then there is the question of why. We see that the regulation is generally very strict, and then at least that is a plausible cause. But then as to how we actually should be really confident, most of the evidence comes down to this, saying, look, in a free market, if prices rise above the physical cost of production, then people would build more until prices fell back down to the physical cost of production. Yet if we go and get a very good measure of, first of all, the raw value of land without any permission attached, combined with physical structure costs, prices are permanently way above that, and the regulation is really the only plausible story about how those prices could be kept that high. Because otherwise, basically, a building would be like having a printing press, just a license to print money. Right? So that's what it really comes down to. And we can just see that land that is pretty much worthless without a piece of paper allowing you to build, and those pieces of paper are hard to get, you get the piece of paper and suddenly the land can be worth $100 million. It is like that.
Yeah, so it's a bit of artificial scarcity that's going on here.
You're not just a bit, David. It's an incredible amount of artificial scarcity. There's something, it really, like the system really is, it's like charging for air. We need the air very badly. There's plenty of air for everyone, but the government will not allow you to breathe without a breathing permit.
Yeah. So we're talking about housing regulation, and a lot of people think that housing regulation makes things better. So I can regulate my single family area. It's quieter. There's less crime. Like, I'm able to get through traffic easier. It's not as populated. What about these benefits that people think are going on? Why are we going to like deregulate and lose those things?
Right. So this is really the heart of any thoughtful approach to this question. First point is, obviously, when you let a lot more people build, then normally parking and traffic and noise do get worse. So it's like, all right, so then what's the mistake? Well, there's two kinds of mistakes. So here is the one that is really obvious. There is another much cheaper, much more humane way of handling these complaints, which is to charge people for driving during peak times, to charge people for parking during busy times, and so on. We have the technology. It's totally possible to do this, and it's much better to make driving more expensive than to make housing more expensive. If the traffic is the problem, raise the price of causing traffic. Don't go and raise the price of housing, which is only partly related. And in fact, when you think about it more, it's like, well, one of the main responses to high housing prices is to live further away, which causes more traffic. It's a crazy system where a lot of what's happening is people are just exporting the traffic problem, whereas charging really does solve the problem. And yet we have this atavistic notion, oh no, driving should be free, parking should be free. So, well, that really helps us a lot when we have something that is free and therefore barely usable. So that's part of it. Now, the deeper answer is that even if we don't go and have any way of improving the traffic and parking noise situations, we still have very strong evidence that on balance, more people lead to a higher standard of living according to most people. How do we know this? Because if you live in an area that is densely populated, you've got all these problems that you mentioned. So hardly any government will use peak load pricing for parking, traffic, and so on. All right. But Here's the crazy thing. In areas where they have horrible parking and driving and noise problems, they normally also still have sky-high property values. Why do people pay so much money to have such horrible problems? The answer is there must be massive offsetting benefits of living near other people, benefits that are so great that they outweigh all the problems and a lot more because people pay all this extra money. And if you think about it a little bit more, you can realize, oh yeah, of course. You can get rid of all parking, traffic, and noise problems by moving to the middle of nowhere in America. But hardly anybody wants to do that. Why not? Because you lose all the good things that come from living around other people. You lose social opportunities. You lose job opportunities, shopping opportunities, cultural opportunities. This is not just my opinion. It is the opinion of the market that consumers are willing to pay a large premium to get a package of all good things humans bring and all bad things together. That package fused together, people will pay a massive premium for. And what this means in economic terms is that governments are trying to stop something that has big positive externalities. So that's the deep story.
So are people just bad at evaluating these things? Like most people I talk
Terrible.
to will be like, yeah, they won't mention any of those benefits
Mm-hmm.
of I'm living in New York City, I have more opportunity, more
Yep.
people, more everything else that comes with that. Are
Right.
people just
Yep.
bad at it?
Well, the answer is that as consumers, they're great. And that's why there's a big premium that people are paying. So as consumers, people demonstrate, actions speak louder than words, that they actually prefer the high density package to the low density package. But as voters, they are not using that knowledge. Instead, they are guided by simple minded slogans of, I don't want any more traffic. I don't want any more parking. Look, and this is how psychologically normal people are. Their political thinking is at a level that is makes one almost embarrassed to be part of the human race, but that's the way politics works. It brings out the worst in people, the most malevolence, the most the folly, the stupidity, the simple-mindedness. This is what is reflected in politics. If you go to another country during an election, it's hard not to think what a bunch of morons these are. But then, of course, in my country, the politics are thoughtful, or at least my side is
Yeah, yeah.
thoughtful.
At
Then
least
you go to
my own
another country
opinion
and just
is.
say, aren't they embarrassed to be Hungarians? I was in Hungary during their election. It's like, look at these posters. Like if you're not part of the culture, then you see it clearly, and to see that people are operating at their lowest possible level, so ugly, just so checked out, the brain's turned off, just full emotion, just a vomit of verbiage. But in your own country, normally you're attached to a side. It's like, well, at least my own side isn't bad. Like they're all terrible. Right? Look at it as like politically, even if I agree with someone, like if I listen to a Yimby, like you said, like the conclusion's good, but the arguments are usually not very good. And I'm like, you're just saying a bunch of false things. And I don't just speak strict truth only. It's like, well, then we can't win. Damn it.
Yeah, yeah. It's always like you listen to someone else's argument, even within your own country, and you're like,
Yeah.
God, everyone's opinion sucks. But of course, mine is like amazingly thought out and rational, right?
Okay, so I'm someone, I think that there are some subcultures like the rationalist community where it is much easier to have a reasonable conversation. Economics is another one. We've got ways of disciplining our thinking and ruling out some of the worst kinds of arguments. But in a normal public forum, it's not just anything goes, like anything except reason goes.
Yeah, yeah. Is there any reason people, or I guess you would think that people are voting in their self-interest when they comes to election time, but in the book you mentioned that they really aren't voting in that direction. Like why is that happening?
That's right. So my book, The Myth of the Rational Voter, it's my first book, goes into this in a lot of detail. Here's the key thing to understand. If you go shopping and you buy a bunch of junk that you don't want and you pay for it, you get out of the store and you are worse off.
Yeah.
And this is a reason to not do that in the first place. And if you ever do buy stuff that it turns out you don't like, don't buy it again.
Hmm.
You are the person that bears the consequences of bad decisions. You are the person that benefits from learning from your own folly. Does this mean that nobody ever makes a bad decision in markets? Of course not, but it does mean that it has basic functionality. On the other hand, when people vote, it's not like that. If you vote for really terrible stuff, what happens? The same thing that was going to happen anyway, because you're just one tiny person. What is your incentive to learn if something passes that you wanted and it devastates your country? Well, it's not like there's anything you personally can do. If you had voted differently, nothing would have changed. If you vote differently in the future, nothing will change. Because again, you're just one person. And so everybody in this country who said that Trump would crash the stock market, there weren't that many, but everybody who said he crashed the stock market lived through the same stock market crash as everybody who thought things would be fine.
Mm-hmm.
It really did. This is a case where, interestingly, of course, you did have the option of shorting the stock market. And if you acted on your vision of doom, then you are now fabulously rich.
Yep.
If you know anyone that did this, my congratulations to them. On the other hand, anybody who claimed they foresaw it but was not shorting the market, you didn't foresee anything. You were just being hyper and got lucky.
Yep. Yep. And hindsight is 2020, of course. So let's say what you're telling us is true, that if we build more housing, we can actually price out roads and parking and make those two problems go away. What are just people misunderstanding about this whole housing situation that would actually convince them to vote more rationally?
I mean, honestly, the biggest misunderstanding is denying that building a lot more housing would bring prices down a lot. There is actual research just asking people, what do you think would happen to prices if we build a lot more housing? And roughly speaking, US public opinion divides as follows. 1/3 says if you build a lot more housing, prices go up. 1/3 says if you build a lot more housing, prices go down. 1/3 says if you build a lot more housing, nothing happens to prices. If that's what you believe, then yeah, why do you want to build housing? So it's just like the most basic, fundamental, deep-seated economic illiteracy of just insisting there's no connection at all between supply and price.
Yeah.
So what can you tell people about that? It's like, come on, man. If you're running a lemonade stand and you can't sell your lemonade, what are you going to do? Cut the price. Why do you think housing is different? If you build a massive apartment complex and you can't rent half your units, what are you going to do? You're going to cut the price. This is not ideology. It's common sense.
Yeah.
And yet we're at a world where there is a whole ideology of being angry at markets and business and rich people to the point where you're just willing to deny obvious facts of supply and price are very closely connected in an intuitive way.
Yeah.
And the ideology is denying that. That is not ideology to affirm that. It is ideology to deny that. It's common sense to affirm it. So I think that's the really big one. Again, probably the other big one, as I said, is to accept that the net effect of density is positive, not in my eyes in particular. I'm a suburban person, but in the eyes of consumers, the net package of density, the value people attach to density is very positive. Actions speak louder than words. People could live in the middle of nowhere. Telework has made that super easy. We've even, for a lot of people, gotten rid of those big benefits for jobs. But still, hardly anyone wants to live out in rural areas where your housing costs will be rock bottom because it messes up your in-person opportunities so badly that people would rather pay 5 times the price to live around people that will clog the roads and park up the streets. And that's just fact. It's not my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the millions of people living in Manhattan and dealing
Yep.
with all of that.
Yep. Yeah, it's funny because the classic Woody Allen New York City resident is like, oh, God, the city's terrible. Oh, no.
Like, why do you
oh,
live
no.
there?
Sorry, what was that, David?
It's
Yeah.
like, why do you even live there if
Yes.
you are complaining
Oh,
all the
well, I
time
couldn't
about it?
stand to live over in those other places, all of those rednecks, Neanderthals.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I remember when I was on the job market at Princeton, a bunch of my fellow students like, I couldn't possibly live in the South. Oh, for heaven forfend, there are animals down there. And it's like, look, you're not going to be living out in like the toothless part of West Virginia. You're
Yeah.
going to be in the highly cosmopolitan part of those states where you would never even hear a Southern accent. So, like, why don't you stop looking in the mirror and complimenting your own incredible open-mindedness and realize that you are a giant bigot. And why don't you actually go there to a southern city and see what it's really like and realize that you don't know what you're talking about?
Yeah. Yeah. No, and cities are just disproportionately left-leaning anyways, so it's not like they'll find any of these rednecks in these populated cities.
Well, I mean, it's important to remember that the political separation is nowhere near as strict as stereotypes make us imagine. So, like, Trump got like over 35% of the vote in California.
Yeah.
And it's like living in California, you'd think that there's like no Republicans there. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm from there and it's easy to just think that. And then you realize, look, it's like people like my dad and all his buddies.
Yeah,
And like the
yeah.
fact that they live in California, despite hating all the politics of the state, is because they like the weather and it's where they're from and their friends are there. And like there isn't the strict separation that you might imagine, in fact.
Yeah. It seems like the housing problem is disproportionately affecting young people.
Yeah,
There's
sure.
something like half of Americans that are below 30 are still living with their parents,
Hmm.
and obviously
Crazy.
there's the older
Sounds a bit
people.
high, but let's run with it.
It's a little, it might be wrong, but it's
Yeah.
very, very high, like proportionally to everywhere else. But Scott Galloway talks about how these older people who have houses are building these regulation moats basically to keep themselves rich. So why would all of these people vote against themselves? Like we can't really make a convincing argument for them.
So that is a very common misperception. Again, we got public opinion data in. It is not true that this is an owners versus renters issue. Renters generally favor a lot of regulation too. Probably about not even much of a difference, if any difference.
Mm,
I mean, what's going on? And then why would tenants favor regulation? Because they think that regulation makes life better and solves problems. Because they have these crazy views about, first of all, denying that there's a connection between supply and price, and second of all, denying that on balance, the net package of all the good and bad of density is good, even though by their own actions they're trying to get density.
yeah.
So, but then how would it be in the self-interest of current owners to go and deregulate? So for some, it is not in their interests, and we'll just be honest about that. But for a lot, it is. Why? First of all, if you're an owner but you want to upgrade, you don't want housing prices to be sky high. If you're in your starter home, yes, it's wonderful there's high regulation, so it makes the sale price of your starter home sky high. But if you want to move to a better home, then in fact, on balance, you'd be better off if housing prices were cheap because you're trying to get more housing. And so you are a net loser from regulation, even if you're an owner, if you want to upgrade.
Yeah.
A second, if you want to subdivide or otherwise improve on your property, then regulation is bad for you because it's preventing you from making money off of your property. Really, in terms of self-interest, what you want is to be the only person in your city that's allowed to build anything he wants, right? And then you sell out and you build a skyscraper,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So next best thing is if only your neighborhood had no regulation. That would be the next best thing. Then you sell out to a bunch of developers and you make a killing. If you could be in the one neighborhood in San Francisco that was unregulated, you would make tens of millions of dollars, maybe like $100 million
Yeah,
from
yeah.
like one stupid townhouse. All right. Now, then third point. If you have kids that you would like to live within 100 miles of you, you are losing in a very important way from regulation. Is basically either your kids are going to live far away from you if the prices are sky high, or they're going to keep living in your basement, which means they don't get married and don't give you grandkids. Right. Alternately, you could go and get a big home equity loan against the inflated value of your house and give it to your kid to let them make the down payment. Why not just have low prices if that's what it's going to be?
Yeah.
It is not in the interest of anyone who wants their kids to live close to have a lot of regulation. Instead, while even if your housing price will fall, but you have this offsetting gain of your kids living nearby because they can afford it, and if you are the kind of person that cares about your kids and wants to see them and wants to know your grandkids, then it totally makes sense, self-interestedly, to be in favor of a pile of deregulation.
Yeah, yeah.
But if
Do you
any of
see,
those three arguments don't apply, then then
and
the
it's not in
system
your
benefits you.
interest. Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
like we're down to a pretty small number of people actually.
Yeah, yeah. Do you see any downstream effects from this housing problem that is affecting young
Mhm.
people that
Oh
apart from
yeah.
housing prices?
Yep. So, I mean, I see almost nothing but downstream effects. So there's almost no issue this doesn't matter for. It matters for equality because renters are poorer than owners, and also because renters just really cannot lose from deregulation. So whereas owners at least can, not necessarily, but they can.
Hmm.
So there is some downside for owners in terms of capital value. So young people tend to be in that group of people that don't own homes and have lower incomes. So it's making inequality worse. It's making social mobility worse. It's making family formation worse because people either have to live in the middle of nowhere or they live in a very small space or they live in with their parents. All right, so there's that. And in the book, I go over a lot of other problems that don't immediately seem to be related to housing regulation, but actually they are very tightly related to housing regulation. It just requires that people just look in a mirror and just say, yeah, like most people are just really wrong about this. I used to be one of them. I'm not going to be one of them anymore. I'm going to go against my society,
Yeah.
right? Which is hard for people to do, but like it is the rationalist path. Like
Yeah.
almost everyone else in human history has lived in a crazy, screwed up society. Probably you do too. A lot of it is just the courage to be a nonconformist and to go and say, I'm not going to believe it just because it's widely believed. I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to be open to arguments and evidence. And I think if you read my Build Baby Build and you are open to arguments and evidence, you will be highly convinced.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, 100%. It made it pretty clear that there's basically mostly only benefits for
Yeah.
most people,
Yes. Yeah.
which is pretty convincing as long as you're not
Yep.
in one of those camps where you don't benefit from housing
Yep.
deregulation.
Yeah.
Um,
But again, like most of the real opposition just comes from fanatics. People who just love the idea of using government to solve problems and just imagine that they are the voice of God and if they are the ones saving our society from horrible things, and all the while demonizing developers of all people. I mean, which is like one step away from thinking that farmers are the root of all evil. It's like,
yeah.
they're not evil. They are supplying the most essential product for human existence, food.
Yeah.
And real estate developers are supplying the second most essential product for human survival, which is shelter. So get off your high horse. You're the bad guy if you're trying to stop housing from being built, not the developers. They're doing the Lord's work.
Yep. Yep. It's like complaining about the price of eggs and blaming the farmers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, are people doing that?
I don't think they are, but it would be the
Yeah,
equivalent of people doing
it's
that.
more of like inflation or something or bird
Yeah.
flu. Yeah, I haven't. I've not heard much vitriol against farmers.
No, no. So they
Yeah,
wouldn't make any sense, just like in this case.
yeah. Well, I mean, like, when does that stop people?
True. Um, I was actually surprised when I was reading your book that this is actually pretty equal in terms of left and right and what they believe about housing regulation. Because my instinct would be to say, oh, probably most people on the right or libertarians are anti-regulation of the housing market, and then liberals are a lot pro regulation.
Well, it's more complicated than that. So here is the fact. First of all, a large majority, maybe 90% of professional pro-housing activists are left-wing. The YIMBY movement's very left-wing. All right, so first truth. Second truth. Left-wing areas tend to have much stricter housing area regulation than right-wing areas because those YIMBYs are just one small part of the left-wing coalition, and a much bigger and more important part is just the anti-market, anti-business local activist group, and they outnumber those YIMBYs, Lord only knows, 5-1, 10-1. So like California has very strict housing regulation, and it's a big part of this general left-wing attitude. The YIMBYs are left-wing also, and they're against it, and they're the most vocal and effective opponents. But still, they are a minority in that coalition. On the other hand, intellectually, like among right-wing people, there's especially a feeling of single-family housing is precious, and we should protect that, and government shouldn't just allow people to be building multifamily homes. And yet, in general, red states have way less housing regulation than blue states. Right. And what's going on, I think a lot of it is just they got a lot fewer of those bad left wing activists, and they also just respect them less. They don't regard them as the conscience of their movement. Look, I think that in a place like California, like the angry people that want to save a bird nest at the expense of $1 billion building, like I think that mainstream Democrats feel kind of awe of the activists and feel like they're the ones that are really living a righteous life, and I'm like a corrupt bargainer,
I'm a
appeaser,
sellout. Yeah.
compromiser, sellout. Whereas in a red state, there is a distaste for those activists, And it is a healthy distaste, which just bow, you tree hugging, red, blue haired, like cat ladies, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't have a lot of proof for this, but it just seems very plausible to me that that's what's going on. Is that your typical left wing anti housing activist, if they just go to Texas and try to get their way, they don't have the same guilt that they can prey on for local governments, which are going to be a lot more Republican, and there'll be a cultural chasm between them, such that even if the left-wing activists are saying something, which if they said it in the right way would resonate, they just refuse to change the way they talk in order to be effective, and thank God for that.
Yeah, yeah, they can play the performative empathy game and then get some support
Yes.
just from people who feel guilty
Yep.
for some reason.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's like there's this old thing in the 1972 election of I'm going clean for Gene, where basically you've got Senator, I believe, Eugene McCarthy, who's a left wing guy. And then there's a bunch of hippies that like him. And then they say, okay, what we want you to do to help your candidate win is get a nice haircut, wear a suit, stop being a hippie, and sell regular people on him. And they were supposedly, at least the slogan suggests they were able to get some hippies to go and change their look in order to be more effective. But at the same time, it doesn't seem like many left-wing people are willing to go and change their look just to appeal to normal Americans like my dad.
Yeah.
It's so important to them to go and keep looking weird and talk and using odd jargon that the fact that if they would just compromise on superficial stuff, they could win on fundamentals isn't important to them.
Yeah, yeah.
Not
It's a
important
little
enough
bit
to change.
like your concept that you talked about, just appeasing a little bit,
Yeah, yeah.
and then having an easier time getting what you want if you're just willing to appease
Yeah,
people.
look, it's just reality, and so appeasement has this terrible name all because of the Munich conference, and yet everyone appeases every day when they live in a society.
Yep.
Why? Because appeasement normally works really well. If someone bumps into you, you could just go and flip out at them and say, I demand you get on your knees and apologize to me, or I will call the police over this affront. You could go and live that way, and your life will actually be terrible.
Yeah, yeah.
Or you could have a stranger bump into you, and you just say, "Oh, sorry," right? And
There you
it's
go.
like, yes. So, and like that's what I
Easy,
do. It works
easy.
wonders for me. And I do know people who are more confrontational than me, and they're making their own lives worse.
Yeah,
And they say, "Oh, this is I'm playing a great public good. I'm deterring bad behavior," and it's like, I don't think you're deterring bad behavior. You're just randomly terrifying people and causing conflict. Like don't don't congratulate yourself too much.
yeah, yeah. No, that always reminds me of the quote, "Would you rather be right or rather be loved?" Basically, sums
Yeah,
it
yeah.
up.
So look, like as a professor, I have chosen to be right in a bunch of cases over being loved, but that's something that I circumscribe to my work. And like a lot of things, it's not really about truth or not. It's just about like, can you go and be nice to people and smile and say, sure, not a big deal, right? And it's like, look, if you say it's not a big deal, that makes it not a big deal. So just
Yeah,
cultivate that attitude. You don't have to be a liar to be a nice person.
yeah, yeah. Is there anything that young people can do in the face of this regulation problem on an individual or agentic level to help themselves
Yeah,
out?
yeah, good question. So be more flexible about where you're willing to live. That's the main thing you can do. So get rid of this idea the only place in the world worth living is the Bay Area. If that's your idea, then you're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah, if you're agentic, again, like basically shop around and be looking for underlooked or like underlooked trade-offs. So it's like if I just go 45 minutes away, then the price falls a lot, but it's actually not that different in terms of what my day is like. So there's that. So other things you can do, if you're like, there are alternative lifestyles of nothing extreme, but just like having a shared house, things like that. Some people are really uncomfortable with that. I mean, like I personally, like, in a way, like if all of our wives could be on board with it, I would actually be very happy living in an intentional community with all my friends and where we could save on housing costs and have common areas and everything. And really just comes down to, well, just worried that our wives wouldn't get along. Like me and my buddies, I think we're doing great. And like we're, at least my very best friends, I feel like we're so simpatico and like, it's just, it's brotherhood really.
yeah,
Sisterhood I have found is just less achieved.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, like, prove me wrong, kids, but that's what I've seen.
It's
So,
like the one friend you made in like sixth grade, and then you're just friends with forever.
yes, yes. So there's that. But like if you can find people that are actually on board with a different kind of housing arrangement, then that seems reasonable to me. Like honestly, like I personally would be totally cool with multi-generational living with my kids and their spouses. My kids are great people. I wouldn't want to live with my parents because they're crazy, but my kids are
Well,
reasonable people.
you might
So
think maybe they think the same thing about you at some
yeah.
point.
So look, they're the ones with bad tempers. Yeah, I've had my dad explode on me for not exploding when he wants me to explode. You
That's a little bit insane.
wouldn't care about that, would you? It's like, can we just look? You're gonna yell at me for not getting angry?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So like my kids, like everyone's got a good temper as long as they were to go and marry people that also were on board with that, then I would feel very comfortable sharing a house with them and having multi-generational living. Uh, yeah, my wife wouldn't be.
Yeah,
Right. So
yeah,
that's the issue.
yeah,
So I guess something very agentic is for the long run, you got to marry someone who's just totally chill.
yeah,
If you're a guy, like find a chill woman who sees the good in people instead, and someone who's not that keen on getting their way. So someone says like it's more important to just to be really liked than to get your details satisfied.
yeah, yeah. Good advice. We only have a little bit of time left, but
Mhm.
I wanted to turn the direction a little bit. I really
Mhm.
liked your book, Self-Help is Like a Vaccine.
Oh, good.
I think it's a really good, just filled with a lot of simple ways that you found out to make your life
Mhm.
better.
I try.
Um, and this podcast is mainly aimed at young people who are trying to
Mhm.
improve themselves, learn about the world, and figure out a way to be more agentic and courageous in the
Yep.
world.
Yep. Great
So,
word. Agentic. Be
yeah,
agentic.
yeah, it is a great word. It's both a blessing and a curse to be agentic. But we have a tradition on the podcast where we ask the guests to share a little bit of maybe vulnerability or a way in which they
Mhm.
still struggle with personal development, and
All right.
then they share that thing, and then they make a commitment to be a little
Hmm.
bit better at it in some way.
Hmm. Hmm. So the big life lesson that I'm always pushing is just to be friendlier to people. And I'll just say, like, in my misspent youth, I was the opposite of this. The number of people I just harangued. It's like, what your problem is? Like, the number of times I told my mom, like, this is a quote, when will you get it through your thick skull that I talked to people like that when I was young, and here's the crazy thing. When I was 17, I read Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, and he said, do the opposite of all this. And I read the book and realized he was right, and I just said, no, I'm not going to change.
Yo,
And then over the decades, I reinvented the wheel. And then like 6 years ago, I read the book and like, why, Brian? Brian, why didn't you just listen? Why didn't you just do it? So that is something. And I'll say, like I in a sense, in a sense, I struggle with. In a sense, I struggle with it. But to me, honestly, at this point, I've really gamified it. And when I'm in a social situation, I actually get a lot of fun out of saying, all right, what's the right thing to say? All right,
yeah,
how can I do it? How can I do it? How can I do it? Right. And like, yesterday I was in a very high stress situation. I was actually speaking before the most hostile audience of my entire life. It was DEI hearings at GMU, and there were a bunch of protesters
no,
in the room. So I lost sleep over it a day, the night after, actually, because it was sufficiently traumatic. But the whole time I was there, like, all right, so how can I, look, I know I can't actually do it, but how would I present myself? How would I talk if I was trying to win over the angriest protester in the room?
yeah,
And that did make it more fun to me. So if you want to say something like, what do I really struggle with? I guess like forgiveness, forgiveness. I struggle with that, right? Especially if the person really clearly has no intention of ever changing. You can't talk to them. They just keep doing it. And it's like, all right, well, the person is in my life. I'm like, so being upset with them isn't going to help anything. And yet it's just hard to
yeah,
do. I mean, the kind of thing that I've actually tried is just in my mind imagining the conversation that would make me feel better. So it's just like you just visualize and imagine the conversation where the person just says, like, I'm so sorry that I could have ever treated you that way. What I did was wrong. And it's just a fantasy in your head, but I think that that does help.
Hmm.
I'm a big fan, as you would know from the book, of exposure therapy. Of if something's really bothering you, the solution is to start off with low doses of what's bothering you and just ramp the dose up until it doesn't bother you anymore.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
usually done for things like spiders, right? If you have spider phobia,
yeah,
arachnophobia, but totally works for like any kind of persistent obsessive thoughts. It hurts, right? If there's something that's really bothering you, try to pushing out of your mind. But yeah, this is like a major problem in my life that I've had is with intrusive, unpleasant, obsessive thoughts. And this exposure therapy has really worked wonders for me. But you know, it requires a lot of painful work. It's just like
yeah,
every day I'm just going to set up some time to deliberately think about something that is horribly unpleasant on purpose,
yeah.
right? And basically, you know it's worked when you get bored during your
When
time
no
of
emotion comes up.
yeah, yeah. It's just like, well, wait, what was I thinking about? Oh yeah, like what about death or whatever? So, what about getting horrible dementia and ending up like my mom? And like I've visualized this for 3 minutes
Oh,
now, and it's like, okay, my mind is wandering because I just don't care anymore.
yeah,
All right, that's what you're going for.
yeah. That's powerful. Oh, yeah, you've heard of Viktor Frankl's paradoxical intention? It's a little bit similar to the
Is it like
exposure
don't think of
therapy
an
process.
elephant?
It's kind of like the thing that you're afraid of happening, basically intend for it to happen when you're taking
Hmm.
the action. So if you're like scared of talking to someone, you intend for it to be awkward on purpose, and then
Right.
it ends up not being awkward.
Oh, I see. So you deliberately try to make it awkward,
Like
and
in
then
your head, you're like, it's going to be
yeah,
awkward. It's going
maybe.
to be awkward. I'm
Yeah.
going to intend for it to be awkward. And you'll even be like, hey, I'm really awkward. I'm sorry, but this might be awkward. And you'll just like go
Right.
all in into intending
Yeah,
for
I
it.
mean, like I can believe that that could work for some people in some cases.
Yeah, yeah. It's for
I mean,
chronic
but
overthinking and stuff like
yes,
that.
right. I mean, definitely a big piece of advice that I give to grad students when they're presenting their work is don't start by apologizing, and definitely don't start by apologizing for being late or for your slides aren't in order or anything like that. You're just calling attention to your failure,
Yeah.
trying to impress people. Put your best foot forward.
It's the I'm sorry I'm late versus thank you for your patience.
Yes, yes, yeah. Great. All right. You got wisdom, David, at a young age. Congratulations.
Hey, thank you, man. Yeah, you talked about forgiveness. So my final question would be, what's a small way that you could maybe get better at that within 1 or 2 weeks, or just be intentional about thinking about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was just going to double down on what I said is visualize the conversation that would make you feel better in detail.
Cool.
And then not just once, you got to do it a bunch of times.
Yeah.
So just like, what would that person have to say to make you cry tears of joy and relief? And then imagine that. Not just in it for a second, but just visualize it like you're watching a movie.
Yeah.
Or like if you're inclined, you could even write it out as a dialogue.
Yeah.
And then the next time, write it again. Don't just reread it, but each time write it out and just say, okay, I'm starting from scratch. What conversation do I want to happen that would make me feel better?
Yeah. That's great advice, man. Well, thank you for
Try.
your time. Where can people
Thank
find
you.
you if they're interested in finding your book or what you do?
All right. So all my books, Build Baby Build and Self Help is Like a Vaccine and over 10 others are all on Amazon. And then my website is bkaplan.com and my Substack is Bet on It.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much, man. This has been great.
Thanks a lot. All right. Fantastic meeting you, David. Hope to meet
Yeah.
you this summer at CaplaCon.
I know. It'll be great.
Okay.
Cool.